Hey friends, long time no see. I've been having some major issues for uploading to YouTube. I don't know why. Okay, so today is my day to read chapter 16 to When the Sea Turns Silver. Thank you to Mrs. Well, I'm not gonna. I'm told myself I'm not gonna re-record. So here we go. Thanks to the other 5th grade teachers for filling in. Math notes. I'm having some issues with the math notes getting uploaded, so I'll get those to you as soon as I can, as soon as it will work. But for some reason, they're just not uploading. All right, so we're gonna start on chapter 16, page 85. I don't know if any of you guys happen to have this copy or you downloaded it, but here we go. Both Pinmi and Yishan ran to the rider. The horse had melted into the white landscape, but the mound of luxurious gray and blue silk on the ground reassured them that it had not been a dream. Yishan gently turned the rider over, and they both gasped. The rider was a woman. As she was stunningly beautiful, only moments before Pinmi had decided the horse was the pinnacle of beauty, but now she found herself reconsidering. The opulent fur-trimmed silk and gold ornaments told of the woman's wealth and nobility, but those were more faded trappings compared with her loveliness. Her face, so pure and clear, could have been formed of water jade, and her shining hair, loosened from its ornate pins, pulled around her like smooth black water on the white snow. Even Yishan looked amazed. The woman opened her eyes. "Children?" she murmured. "Why are there children here? What has happened?" "Your horse threw you," Yishan said. "We wanted to make sure you were all right." The woman sat up. She looked at them and at the countryside around her. Pinmi noticed that her eyes looked as if happiness had not shone in them for a long time. "I remember now," the woman said, her voice like bamboo water chime. Baima reared suddenly. It's not like him at all. Something unexpected must have surprised him. Pinmi remembered the red butterfly she thought she had seen in the snow. Could that have surprised the horse? "Do I still have?" The woman pushed aside her folds of silk and held a small bag up to her chest. She breathed a sigh of relief. "Here it is. I hoped it was not hurt." The woman opened the bag and pulled out a lavish embroidered fabric. As she held it open, Pinmi found herself gawking. It was an embroidered picture. There was a grand mansion surrounded by a beautiful garden with flowered fish ponds and red pillared pavilions. A sparkling river flowered before a stone wall, and mountains disappeared into the sea of clouds. The finest details were included, from the butterfly-shaped windows to the swimming ducks. Pinmi knew Amma was known for her embroidery skills, but this was extraordinary. Every thread vibrated with color. How beautiful, Pinmi breathed, her awe overcoming her shyness. It is just like the windows embroidery in Amma's story. "Story?" the woman inquired. "Oh, everything reminds her of a story," Yishan said mockingly, but also with a touch of pride. "Pinmi is a storyteller." "I am," Pinmi thought with surprise. She had thought herself many things before: a scared mouse, a quiet girl, a coward, but never a storyteller. But before she could think further, the woman gave her a smile. "Well, I'm not sure if I'm ready to get up yet," the woman said, "so perhaps a story would be good medicine." Pinmi began to shake her head in protest, but the woman's eyes were weighted with so much worry that Pinmi found her own heart pale. The green of the jade bracelet shimmered at her like a thread in one of Amma's embroidery silks. Again, Pinmi felt the familiar longing pierced her. Amma would never refuse to tell a story. How could she? So with her voice slightly trembling, Pinmi began. The story of the widow's embroidery. There was once a widow who was extremely skilled at embroidery. When she embroidered a flower, bees would try to nestle in it. When she embroidered a tree, birds would try to land on it. And she was known far and wide and supported herself and her young son with the embroidered pieces she sold. One day, when she was at the market, she saw an old man selling the painting of the partial I lost my spot. Okay. A painting of the estates. There was an elegant villa with lakes dotted with orange fish and moon gates that led to courtyards lined with trees. She stared at the painting, and a yearning she had never felt before filled her. Without thinking, she spent all the money meant for rice and bought the painting. When she returned home, she showed the painting to her son. If only we could live in this painting, she said to him with tears in her eyes. I feel as if my heart will break if I do not live in this place. Well, mother, the son said, trying to comfort her, your embroidery is so lifelike. Perhaps you should embroider this picture. Then you will feel the same as if you were living in it. The widow's face lit up and she nodded. Yes, of course, she said, and immediately went to work. And she did not stop working. Hour after hour, her needle moved, and at night she lit the lantern to continue. She carried on like this for days, and then days turned into months. Her son, without complaint, began to cut wood to support them. The month turned into years, and the widow's hair turned white, and when the strands fell from her head, she embroidered them into the clouds. Her needles pricked her fingers, and when her blood dripped, she stitched it into the red peonies. They could no longer afford lantern oil, so she burned branches, and when her eyes watered from the smoke, she sowed her tears into the lotus pond. Hurry up, the boy said. She'll never even notice you're gone. Well, I skipped a page, sorry. Finally, after 8 years, the old widow put down her needle. She was finished. Her son, who was now a young man, stood in awe as he looked at the completed piece. It was magnificent. The widow sighed, a soft sound of contentment. The door banged open and a wild wind burst into the room. The embroidery flew into the air and out the door. The widow and her son rushed after it, but only saw it fluttering in the distance. The widow collapsed to the ground. When the widow finally opened her eyes, she begged her son to find her embroidery. I shall die without it, she said. So the son left his mother in the care of his neighbors and went in search of the embroidery. After many days of traveling, he found himself by the sea. The moon was rising, and its reflection on the water made a long silver-white path that connected seamlessly to the ground. As the young man followed the moon path with his eyes, he was startled to see a small figure lying on the shore. It was a boy. Hello? The boy said as he fixed his red cap. What are you doing here? The widow's son then saw this was not an ordinary young boy. He must be an immortal of some sort, the son thought. So he told the boy his story. Oh, that embroidery, the boy said. The Sea King's daughter sent a servant for it. She and all her ladies in waiting are copying it for their own pieces. I must get it back, the son said. My mother will die without it. You'd have to go to the Sea King's palace. "And that's a hard journey," the boy said. "First, you must swim the sea until you reach frozen water and dive into it without a shiver or a moan. If you make one sound of discontent, you will turn into ice and shatter into 10,000 pieces. Do you still want to go?" The son nodded and started immediately to walk to the ocean. The boy grabbed his arm. "Wait," the boy said. "I'll get you a ride." The boy put 2 fingers in his mouth and made a shrill whistle. The waves of sea roared, and as the water rolled off the shore, a huge white stone appeared. The boy bent over the stone and knocked on it. "Come out," he said. "This fellow needs a ride." Did the stone quiver? The widow's son rubbed his eyes. "Hurry up," the boy said. "She'll never even notice you're gone. She's busy sewing. Come on." The waves smashed into the stone and made a crackling noise like a porcelain plate breaking. When the water withdrew, a white horse stood among some broken pieces of matching white stone. "Good," the boy said. "He's in a hurry." The boy made a motion with his hands, and the horse walked up to the son. "Now, you'll make it," the boy said with a grin. The widow's son, after closing his gaping mouth, nodded his thanks, climbed on the horse's back, and galloped into the water. The horse and the young man swam through the piercing cold water. The dark waves flung shards of ice at him, and the blood from his cuts steamed and froze. When the water no longer churned and all was silent, the horse plunged into the bitter water, and all was black. When the son opened his eyes, he was warm and dry and still on the horse. The sun was overhead, and the majestic palace of crystal was before him. Without his urging, the horse entered the palace and brought him to the grand hall where his mother embroidery hung in the palace of honor. Dozens of beautiful women were sitting around it, each sewing a copy. "I'm here for my mother's embroidery," he announced. The women looked at him and whispered to one another. Dressed in blue, and the loveliest of them all, Rose. It was only then that he saw she had a fish tail instead of legs. "Let us keep it for the rest of today so we can finish our copies," she said. "You may take it tomorrow." The widow's son was awestruck by her beauty. Even with her fishtail, she was the most stunning creature he had ever encountered. And he, who had not been turned by pain or possible death, found he could not refuse her. So he let himself be led to the golden bed at the back of the hall, where he soon fell asleep. In the meantime, the women rushed to finish their pieces. They called their servants to bring them more thread and silk, and the women in the blue requested a new needle. "Fetch the finest one we have from my father's treasury," she ordered her servant. But one by one, each woman rose to compare her work with the original, shook her head in defeat, and abandoned the hall. The last one to leave was the woman with the fishtail. She, of course, was the Sea King's daughter, the most beautiful as well as the most skilled. But as she held her embroidery up to the widow's, she shook her head. Hers, like the other, was a poor copy. No one could match the fineness or colors of the widow's silver clouds, flaming flowers, or crystal lake. The widow's embroidery is so beautiful, the Sea King's daughter thought with yearning. "I love it so. I wish I could be part of it." And with that whim, she began to embroider a small image of herself in the garden of the widow's embroidery. "But I'll give myself legs," she thought with an amused smile, "because it's a picture of mortal land." When she finished, it was late, and she was quite tired. She tucked her needle into the widow's embroidery to retrieve in the morning and left for bed. When the sun woke up, it was still dark and the hall was empty. His mother's embroidery still hung in the front of the room, glistening in the fading moonlight. What if the sea daughter and her ladies changed their minds, he thought. I better go now. So he took the embroidery as quietly as possible and jumped onto the waiting horse. The amazing horse took off at a gallop, racing through the water, across the frozen sea, and back into the seaside. When they reached the shore, the man dismounted the horse, waded in the water, and an ocean wave washed over it. When the water withdrew, the horse was again a large white stone. Then another large crest rose and scooped the stone back into the sea. The young man gazed at the empty impression on the shore and at the rolled embroidery in his hand. Without another pause, he turned and ran home. "Mother," he called as he burst into the house. The widow was in bed, thin and pale, her eyes closed, and he feared the worst. He rushed to her side and laid the embroidery on her. "Your embroidery is here. I have returned it." Slowly, the widow's finger touched the smooth, delicate threads. Her eyes opened and she smiled. Her second smile in over 8 years. "My son," she said, with one hand on the embroidery and the other clasping his, "help me bring this out into the light so I can see it better." Outside, they carefully spread their embroidery on the ground. As they unfolded it, the silk grew and grew. It covered their poor house and bare land, and in its place, the stately manor and glorious gardens formed the widow's embroidery was coming to life. The swimming fish in the sparkling water, the trees with the jade green leaves, the courtyard with patterned walkways, all real. Everything was exactly as the widow had sewn it, except for one thing. For standing among the brilliant flowers and fluttering butterflies was a beautiful woman dressed in blue. She held a silver needle in her fingers and was looking around in confusion, for it was the Sea King's daughter, who had sewn herself into the embroidery. But when she saw the widow and the son, her expression cleared and was replaced with one of affection. She saw she could not love the embroidery so much without loving its creator and her son. The delighted widow welcomed her to share her incredible fortune. The son and the Sea King's daughter soon married, and the widow lived the rest of her days in complete contentment. "Is that the end?" the noble woman asked in an almost demanding tone. "What else happened to the son and the Sea King's daughter?" "I suppose," Pinmi said, a little surprised, "after they were married, they lived happily ever after?" "Yes," but the woman stopped mid-sentence. And both Pinmi and Yishan looked towards where she was staring. A glimmer of scarlet was wavering in the white and gray sky. The red butterfly. Pinmi hadn't imagined it. The two children and the women watched without moving. The butterfly fluttered through the falling snowflakes. Back and forth it went. An intricate, silent dance. At last, the butterfly landed on the noble woman's lap. On top of the gorgeous embroidery, it gave one final tremble and vanished. Pinmi blinked her eyes. Had the butterfly melted into the embroidery, or had a gust of wind blown it away? Where did it go? But then the woman gave a low cry of anguish, so full of sorrow and heartache, all other thoughts disappeared. "He is dead," the woman whispered, and a single tear began to roll down her cheek. All right, chapter 17 tomorrow.